My name is Paul Colvin, Jr. My date of birth is January 17th, 1967. I was born in Springdale, Arkansas.
And we have your written permission, but we want to acknowledge on video that we have your permission to do the interview.
You have my permission to do the interview.
Thank you, Mayor. And tell me first, who were your parents?
My parents are Paul and Sue Colvin.
And who are your grandparents, first on your father's side, then on your mother's side?
My father's parents were Oscar and Mabel Colvin. And my mother's parents was Jess and Nora Fultz.
And tell me, who were your siblings? What brothers and sisters did you have?
I have actually two brothers, James Colvin and Garrett Colvin.
Okay. And tell me, what was your father's business? Or what was your family business?
Our family business was in the trucking industry.
Okay. And what was your part in the family business?
Well, my role in the family business growing up was from sweeping floors to washing windows to actually becoming a dispatcher for the company for several years and later on doing consulting work for them.
What was the name of the company and where was it located?
Our company originated out of Springdale, Arkansas, and it was Sioux Transportation, and it's still in operation today.
Okay. Besides working for the family business, what other jobs growing up did you work at?
I've had several opportunities in my life growing up, from being a fireman at Springdale and retiring there to opening an auction company and a real estate company.
Okay. What are your earliest memories of Taneytown?
My earliest memories go way back. As a child, I can remember my parents hauling my brother and I out to the grape festival to eat the grape ice cream and eat the grapes and ride the rides, and later on getting sick and throwing up and coming home. So, it was quite the adventure coming out to Taneytown every year.
Do you remember any of about what year was it when you came out to the grape festival, and what else do you remember about it?
And gosh, my earliest memories was back in elementary school, coming to the grape festival and the events that was put on. It was always kind of an Andy Griffith type feel when you came to Taneytown, that Mayberry experience, everybody knowing your name. So actually moving to Taneytown later on in life was quite an experience for me.
Tell me, what businesses or restaurants do you remember in Taneytown when you first came out here?
It was always a treat. My earliest experiences coming to Taneytown, I was eating at Mary Maestry's. It was always a thrill to be able to go upstairs in the old Mary Maestry building, the old house that they had, and being able to go up the stairs and eat kind of in a family-style dining area. And then as they rebuilt and put new facilities in and still the same food, just different look about it. We tried to make the trip out here at least once a month to eat.
Were there any other places you would come out in Taneytown with you and your family when you were growing up?
Oh yeah, we go to Venetian Inn quite a bit as well. Really back then, there was really only two restaurants in Taneytown, which is Mary Maestry's and Venetian Inn. You had one of the local bars that served hamburgers that you could stop in at occasionally, but at that time the town was pretty small.
Tell me, where all have you lived? I know you said you grew up in Springdale, but after that, where did you live in Springdale, and then how did you eventually end up out here?
Well, early in my childhood, we lived in Missouri and Kansas and a little bit in Texas, but this was when I was 5-6 years old range. We finally settled in Springdale, finished elementary school, junior high, and high school in Springdale. After high school is when my parents actually moved to Taneytown back in 1985. And then I later moved to Taneytown as well back, I think it was 1989 when I moved here.
Okay. What was Tontitown like when you moved here? Describe where you lived and what the community was like.
You know, the community back then when I moved here in 1989 was still that small town feel. You had your local station that everybody hung out at, and the kind of the gossip chain, if you will. There still really was not a whole lot of business activity in Tontitown. Still just a couple of restaurants and fairly small. We moved on Clint's Road where we built a house, and my brother built a house beside each other along with one of our friends, and lived there for quite some time.
Who were some of the first people you remember meeting in Tontitown?
You know, some of the first people I met in Taneytown was one of our previous mayors, which is Paul Maestri. Has passed away a few years back. Tommy Granata was another individual that I met that owned the bowling alleys in Springdale. From the Zupo families and the Penalto families, met quite a few of them, and actually decided early on when I first moved to Taneytown to get on the volunteer fire department, which they had started some 45 years ago.
We talked earlier about the Grape Festival. Have you ever been involved with helping at the Grape Festival? And if you were, what did you do?
You know, actually, I haven't had a lot of involvement with the Grape Festival. It's part of the Catholic Church, and they handle pretty much everything with it and involved in it. You know, years ago, the volunteer fire department used to set up a hamburger stand at the Grape Festival, and you know, obviously, I would work during those events at the Grape Festival selling hamburgers to benefit the volunteer fire department. But you know, as far as the actual setup and the operations of the Grape Festival, I've had none.
In your own words, how big a deal is the Grape Festival to the community, and what's the feeling of the event?
You know, the feeling of the Grape Festival I think for Taneytown is just a hometown community type event. You know, neighbors still come together that may not see each other all year and only see each other once during the Grape Festival. There's still a tremendous amount of community involvement wrapped around the Grape Festival as far as the setup. A lot of the family members, the old family members, still make the spaghetti to hooking up the lights that make everything work over there. So, you know, to me, it's a great opportunity for our citizens to gather around each other as one.
I get the feeling from watching them make spaghetti that event is about more than making spaghetti. Do you know anything about that, or can you comment? Have you ever been over there to watch them do it?
Yeah, I've actually got to witness them making the pasta and putting it all together. And like I said before, it's a community event. The involvement, it's not just making a product to sell to the public as much as it is getting people together once a year that may or may not see each other throughout the year, coming together as one to put the whole show on.
In addition to the Grape Festival, what other big local events are there here in Tontitown that you know about?
You know, several years back, we've created some events in Tontitown. We do an annual bocce ball tournament, which is similar to bowling without the pins, obviously, and more like shuffleboard, I would say. But it's another great event that's been created, and once again, trying to bring communities together and involvement with each other.
Let's talk about how you got involved in local politics, because you didn't really spend a lot of years on the council, and you ended up as mayor. Just kind of, in your own words, walk us through how that happened.
You know, for me, getting involved in local government really stemmed from my involvement with, once again, the fire department. After serving several years as a Springdale firefighter and retiring from there, I was fortunate enough to get on the volunteer fire department's board and was able to serve for a good number of years, trying to make sure it stayed operating. My involvement with the fire department led me actually from speaking with the council a number of times to running for mayor. In 2014 is when I actually filed my paperwork to run for mayor and was fortunate enough to be elected by the citizens of Tontitown to become mayor of the city. And it's been really an eye-opening experience for me because I had no experience being on a city council and watching how city government ran. And now, almost 4 years later, the experience has been very rewarding for me.
Talk about your decision, I say the city's decision, to go from the kind of the small old-timey city hall to this larger facility that's more modern and using the, I mean, how did that idea happen, and then what did it take to bring it to fruition?
Well, the idea to expand City Hall actually occurred many years ago. Previously, Mayor Granata had mentioned it in a council meeting to expand the current City Hall that we had. And I guess it fell upon deaf ears at that time. But one of my major focuses when I became mayor was knowing that we needed to expand the City Hall with the number of employees that we had and the number of future employees that we're going to have. It was just too small and the quarters were too tight to operate in. Our water and our sewer department was segregated or separated from our administration building, so people would actually physically have to go outside to the next building, whether it's rain, snow, or shine, to visit with each other or discuss things or plans. So it kind of, we put the idea together, planted the seed, if you will, some 10 years ago by Mr. Granata, and then going forward here today, it was really a community effort. We held an auction to generate some funds. We also, by tying the two buildings together, enabled us to utilize monies from the water and sewer department to create this project. And then, a lot of help from volunteers and people donating items to get this built. So, it wasn't an overnight thing. We started first with the parking lot, building and constructing it, and then tying the buildings together. So, it's been a labor of love, if you will, for the last 2.5 years, just trying to get it up in the air.
Talk to me a little bit about these life-size giant pictures that you have, the one behind you of the grapes, and then the band and the farm scene. Whose idea was that, and why did y'all decide to do it?
We some of the things that you'll see inside the City Hall that we built, we wanted to try to capture some of Taneytown's heritage. We don't ever, I don't think, want to forget our past. So the idea that was brought forward for the murals that are in here, stems from me visiting our museum and looking at some of the older photos of Taneytown, because I don't want the public or any future planning board members, council members, or mayors to really forget where Taneytown came from. The mural that you see with the little band in it, that's Father Bandini. He was actually the first mayor of Taneytown, so obviously without his courage to bring people to Taneytown, there would never have been a Taneytown. So I really don't want us forgetting that. Obviously behind me, the mural that you see on the wall here is an older grape vineyard that was located here in Taneytown, and that's where Taneytown's livelihood stemmed from for a long time, was the growing of grapes and making of bricks. So, it's just a little piece of me that I don't want anybody to forget about Taneytown. We can always paint walls different colors, but people don't need to forget where they come from.
Over the years, there's been a lot of significant development in Taneytown, from a little bitty tiny small town to now a much kind of medium-sized town, growing very rapidly. What do you remember since you've been here about that growth? It's like the growth in Taneytown's been a blink of an eye. You wake up and all of a sudden somebody's pushing dirt somewhere else with a new building coming up out of the ground, or a new home site that's been brought into Taneytown. The growth for Taneytown over the past 3.5 years has been tremendous. We've increased evaluations of people's properties out here, and
and tremendous amount of residential growth. You know, we're still pushing to try to have more retail growth to support the city, but yet still today, Taneytown is a town that people want to come to. We don't want to discourage anybody from moving to Taneytown at all, and fortunately, we've seen a tremendous amount of growth because of the people really wanting to live in Taneytown.
There'd been a shift over the years in the water and sewer utilities that gave Tontitown more control over its growth. Let's talk about that if you're familiar with it.
Well, I don't know necessarily that we've had a shift really in our water and sewer utilities.
Well, I meant Springdale was kind of in charge there for a while.
Yeah,
Things.
our sewer was developed, you know, over now I guess 12, 14, 15 years ago. And we're seeing more growth in our sewer department, which is hooked to NACA, and we're expanding lines even today into different areas of Taneytown to support future growth. You know, for years, Springdale City had supplied the city of Taneytown with water, you know, and we just felt like that it was time for us to kind of stand on our own. Springdale's been acting as a middleman with Beaver Water District to sell us water. And we decided to go with 2 Ton, which is another water purveyor that's going to be selling direct to us. So in a sense, we're eliminating the middleman and kind of standing alone to support ourselves with water. And it's not just that as much as it is, we also will have an emergency connection. Right now, City of Taneytown, if something drastic were to happen, the only connections we have is to Springdale. And I've often thought that we need to have a backup just in case something happens. So this connection with 2 Ton will enable us to, one, get a supplier without having the middleman involved, and then also have an emergency connection back to Springdale if something goes awry.
What's the timetable on that? When was that supposed to happen, and how long has that plan been in the works?
Once again, the plan for having our own water has been in the works for about 2.5 years. We had to gain support from the public to vote on a tax issue to be able to pay for it, because essentially it's a $9 million project to be able to do this. We are actually going to go out to bid January 27th for the construction of the water lines, and our hopes is that the water line project will be completed within a year.
Okay. Tontitown, since the 90s or so, has had a lot of different mayors, and there's been a lot of change. What do you know about that you can remember, if you want to share it?
There has been a lot of change in Taneytown, and you know, for me being mayor, you know, previously there's been quite a few mayors that didn't stay the full tenure, which the position of mayor is a 4-year tenure. And we've had a lot of turmoil in Taneytown over the past, I don't know, several mayors. Matter of fact, it's funny, when I became mayor, I set goals for myself. My first goal was to be mayor for a week. After I was mayor for a week, was to be mayor for a month, and so on and so on. So, you know, I kind of, I guess, took the Lance Armstrong approach to being mayor, in that the longevity of a mayor in Taneytown hadn't been that great for quite a while. So I made a commitment to the citizens of Taneytown, since they put their faith in me, was to make sure I at least stayed my 4-year term. And fortunately, knock on wood, I think I've got about 6 more months to fulfill that goal.
Before I forget, let's talk about your business here in Taneytown. When did you bring that business to Taneytown, and what is the business, and you know, how'd you get in it? Kind of walk us through that.
You know, when I first moved to Taneytown, I brought a local business as well, as my parents did, which was an auction company. Currently, we're a full-service auction company here in Taneytown, which is Block Realty and Auction. I got into the auction world back in 1994 range, when I first became a licensed auctioneer, and from there I decided to get into the real estate business and auctioning of real estate, which occurred somewhere around 2000. So we incorporated our real estate auction business along with our personal property auction business, which were located on 633 South Barrington here in Tontitown. We do several auctions in the area as well as across the state, and I'm also a contract auctioneer for several firms across the United States, so I do some travel work doing auctions as well.
What is the business climate out here? How many businesses have moved here in the recent years, and how do they do out here?
You know, the retail climate for Taneytown, I think, is growing. You know, as you look on the big picture map of Northwest Arkansas, really the push is to come west. We're starting to see more and more retail facilities looking at Taneytown and coming into Taneytown. We recently hired a city planner that is not just a planner but also a community development person. And we're continuing to work towards future growth for Taneytown with the extension of the new bypass that's going to be coming in, the new water line coming in a year. We're looking and anticipating at annexing farther west. We see the horizon for Taneytown going up with more retail traffic. Obviously, you know, with Highway 412 going right through the middle of our town, we're, I think, the third or fourth most entered area of the state. So it sets itself up very well for retail. And we're trying to build infrastructure to our western part of our city to accommodate that currently.
What are some of the retail businesses and other businesses that have moved out here in the last 5 or 10 years that you're aware of?
You know, the retail business that has moved here has been a pretty diverse lot. For years, it seemed like we had just wholesale type companies building and going into metal buildings back in the industrial park. But like I said, the landscape is changing in Taneytown. P&K Tractor, John Deere dealer that's located here in Taneytown, is one of the nation's largest John Deere dealerships, have come here and built their business. We're starting to see more box type stores looking into Taneytown coming in. So we're having a good range of not just one type of business coming to town. I mean, obviously there's more and more restaurants that's being built, from Jose's to the old established restaurants and Mama Z's that are still currently here.
What else can you think of maybe that I haven't thought to ask about that's important about Taneytown, or the memories you have or things you want to say about the city?
Well, you know, for me, Taneytown, like I said, is Mayberry, USA. You know, we haven't lost sight of the fact that the people we live next door to are our neighbors. I still enjoy the idea of people knowing your name when you pass by each other. And I don't want any of our councilmen or myself to forget that. You know, Taneytown is still a small community in the grand scheme of things here in Northwest Arkansas. And as we grow, I still want to, or I hope that we continue keeping that hometown flavor here in Taneytown.
You mentioned the aldermen. You've gotten to know a lot of these aldermen as mayor.
Right.
And some of them have been on the board for a long time. Henry Piazza, Arthur Penzo, Tom Granada. What can you tell me about some of them? They have a lot of different personalities, but if someone said, tell me about your alderman, what would you tell them?
You know, my aldermen are a diverse group, if you will. You know, I've got one alderman that's serving in his second term. To the other end of the spectrum, an alderman that's fixing to be serving here 50 years. So you know, and the lot goes in between. There's a lot of knowledge. There's a lot of historical data in these people. Along with that comes a lot of wisdom. So, you know, I look to these gentlemen for their advice and their guidance on how to run this city. You know, fortunate enough to have one of our aldermen that served as mayor. So anytime that I have a question, I have somebody that I can fall back on. Not to say that they're not opinionated, they are. And you know, the debates that we have in this room, it's astonishing to me why we're even arguing about some of it, but it's because they're heart and they care. So, you know, it's nice to have such a diverse group on this board. watching out for the citizens of Taneytown, because I truly think that each one of them, every vote they make is on behalf of the citizens here, and they put great thought into that before their vote.
You said 50 years. Would that be Henry Piazza? Tell me about Henry. What's he like?
You know, what's amazing about Henry Piazza is every day that you see him, he is the same. You'll never catch him different than he is. Born and raised in Taneytown, lived here all of his life. Don't think he'll ever move from the home that he lives in currently. You know, he's a joy to have on the council, as well as he's the leader of our farmers market that he created, actually. And just walking around the park and seeing him on Thursdays is inspiration to me.
Talk to me, if you know about it, the project he did of the statue that's out in front of City Hall.
Before my time, I really don't have enough knowledge to even discuss about that.
That's okay. He said that was one of his
I'm
favorite accomplishments.
I'm sure it is, as well as pavilions and stuff in the park that they created. I mean,
And I know Alderman Penzo has been on the board a long time. Tell me a little bit about him. What's he like?
you know, Arthur Penzo is another one of those guys that what you see is what you get. I first met Arthur becoming a volunteer fireman. He was actually one of the first people that helped develop Tontitown Fire Department, and retired, gosh, 3 or 4 years ago from there. But he bleeds Taneytown. I mean, there's not a day that goes by that Arthur doesn't think about the citizens of Taneytown, and that's what I have a lot of respect in him for, is he's never done anything on this council for himself as much as what he's done for the people of Taneytown.
And finally, you had mentioned that you knew Tommy Granata from the Springdale days at his business there. Tell me how you first got to know him and how he's helped you on the council.
You know, Tommy is a unique individual. I mean, local football star back in the day to, you know, growing up and going to his bowling alleys that his dad started many, many years ago. And once again, what you see is what you get with Tommy. I mean, he is a true Taneytown citizen in the fact that anything that he discusses or talks about on this council, he's always trying to think of what's good for Taneytown. You know, and that's what's unique about all these folks is I don't think they ever think about anything as much for themselves as they do for others, which is what you should do as a councilman.
And you've addressed some of this before, but I'm going to go ahead and ask you again. If someone came to you and said, tell me about your town of Taneytown. I've never been there and I don't know anything about it. What would you tell them?
You know, my initial response would be tell them it's the best place in America to live. You won't find a more welcoming town to come to. I don't think you'll find any greater neighbors to have than the citizens of Taneytown. You know, we are a small, tight-knit community, but everybody's independent of themselves too. It's just a really unique place to live, and I couldn't think of any better place to raise a family. Lots of heritage and lots of really fine people to live by.
If a business or a family was thinking about moving to Taneytown and they came to you and said, Mayor Colvin, why Taneytown? What would you tell them?
I'd say, why not Taneytown, is what I would tell folks that asked. You know, once again, if I could pick some place to go, it would be here. You know, the growth potential that we're seeing in Taneytown right now is very conducive for retail businesses. The number of rooftops that's been created in the last 3 years, and the future number of rooftops that we have planned for the next 3 to 4 years, the growth potential for a young startup business is great. There's access to the world from Taneytown with the new construction of Highway 612 that's going to be coming in here shortly. It gives you access to the airport or any direction close to anything in Northwest Arkansas. So for me, Taneytown is the answer for a lot of people.
Before I forget, the barrels, the little planks from the barrels that have the family names. What are those and why did you do it?
Well, you know, the stays that they're called that come from the barrels. Once again, I didn't want to lose focus, and I don't want any of the folks in Taneytown to lose focus of why Taneytown is here. From Father Bandini's picture that's on the wall to the 40-some settlers that came with him to be recognized for their commitment to come to Taneytown. You know, I want people when they walk into City Hall to ask the question, what are those names? And hopefully the response will be that these are the people that actually founded and created Taneytown, and we don't want to forget them.
And finally, if someone asked you to finish this sentence, what would you say? My favorite thing about Taneytown is
The people. The people. They're all unique.